Hey guys, it's Kiki from CabaYoga, and I'm here with another amazing interview with a hot topic. And this is kind of inspired by what's going on now, but also something that has been a really interesting conversation that I've had with multiple people throughout my life. So I've got here with me today Miss Kathleen Rouleau, who is a death doula and also a hospice nurse. So we will be talking about two big topics here. One is living in fear of death, and the other is environmental impact of death and the processes that go along with death, really. So let's just start by having you introduce yourself, please, Kathleen, and tell us a little bit about yourself and then kind of how you got to where you are.
Okay. Okay. So hi, my name's Kathleen. Thank you so much that people call you Kiki.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak on this topic. It is extremely near and dear to me to have these conversations with anybody and everybody. The point that I think really hit home for me was when I realized that very few people willingly have conversations and think about death, their own death or other people's deaths. And that really started to come into light when I was in my teens and helping to take care of family members who were passing. I grew up in a family where death was not taboo. When I was a young girl and my grandfather died, I was brought to the funeral home to be a part of that. And I was the only child that was there other than my siblings. So it was, even within my larger family, still a little bit unique. So I think that feeling of comfortability and curiosity and openness is what laid the foundation for the exploration later on in life to become a death doula, home funeral consultant, and green burial advocate, and then eventually a hospice nurse.
Okay, cool. I love that that you kind of your last step, kind of, we'll say, was to become the hospice nurse, because I think a lot of people see this journey as being one that starts out in nursing, and then you kind of find your niche, maybe with the passing, the end of life processes. So that's super interesting that you kind of went the other route. So can you tell us a little bit about what drove you to make the choice to go to nursing school as a working death doula?
Oh, understanding. I wanted to understand the fullness of the situation. There is this unique human experience where we're looking at something from our own perspective, and it's hard to understand the other. And I really wanted to be able to gift the people that I was working with an understanding of what is going on and the choices that are happening as far as like medically. Instinctually, I think that the thing that sets apart the difference between hospice nursing and being a death doula or a death midwife is that there is a immediate focus on the whole body, spiritual aspect of dying. And in hospice nursing, not only is it a job so that you're given very strict criteria, even from state, as to what you can and cannot do, how much time you actually have to spend with somebody, your focus is physical alleviation of symptoms. Mm-hmm. And the focus is on the interventions of medicines. Not that social workers and chaplains don't get involved, because they're really involved, and they're a part of the whole team that somebody gets when they come on hospice. There's an entire team of people that rally around you. Equating it to a hospital experience as a birth, you still have a large team of people around you, but you're not their only focus. And with having a death doula or a death midwife, they can give you that, if that's the contract you set up with them, that they are with you through the whole situation. They are able to tailor it a little bit more, specifically to the spiritual aspect, if that's what you want. They can just be present and just actually allow the family to direct, and then they're just there as a supporting role, but they could also lead that role. You know, they could bring in all the accompaniments for a ritual, or they can give the families the ideas of what rituals. A lot of families nowadays don't have a deep connection to their own ancestral roots. And some death doulas are, you know, very specified, you know, that this is, you know, this is what I want to do. Not all death doulas will actually sit at the end of life with somebody as they pass. Some will, some won't. Some want to do this, but they want to tailor it to just helping people do legacies, or helping people just fill out the paperwork that is necessary at end of life. Not every death doula, they don't all do the same exact things.
Wow. So if I were looking for a death doula, I could say, you know, Kiki, I'm from here, you know, my ancestors are Nordic. So would I be able to find, you know, people that are specialized in those? Maybe that's a weird example. Maybe there's something easier, but a Nordic specialist, someone who knows about those death traditions and can kind of involve that in the process, that there are specialists in that aspect.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people, I don't know that a lot of people know that. And, you know, when you talk to people about, you know, some people will be like, well, when I die, I want to be pushed off in a canoe and, you know, set on fire with the beating drums or whatever. But that's actually, it sounds like, you know, not super far-fetched, right? If you had the right doula that was kind of able to align with you.
So now, while I actually have heard that there's been whispers that what we consider the Viking funeral, actually, there are people who are trying to revive that. There's also people who are trying to revive open air cremation, and there actually are 2 places, and off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I don't exactly remember, that are actually doing open air cremations, which is more often what you think of when you think of funeral rites in India on the Ganges, right? It's like it's open air, you know, funeral rites. And there is absolutely the most beautiful thing about the melting pot of America is that you can come in contact with other people who are just as passionate with you. Say, you know, for your Nordic background, if you really wanted to dive into that, absolutely, you would be able to search and find somebody who wanted to do that.
Cool.
The thing about being a death doula for me, and I can't say, you know, can't speak for everybody, is that you're connecting with the family and helping them have the I don't want to say the experience, but, you know, can't think of another word, but like the experience that is going to be most helpful for them. And if that is, you know, someone sitting off in the corner playing a harp because that's what you want, then your doula will help you find that. If you want to be, I don't know, women like to birth in tubs. I'm a water woman. I really would like to die in water. Like, I would love it, if I could have one of those blow up, it's got to be really warm water though, and have somebody hold me, as I pass, and allowing me to be in water at that moment. I would love that. Right.
Yeah. I think my example was a little bit, trendy or like,
not at all.
More like aesthetic of like, the process of what you do with the body. But before that, I'm sure there are all of these beautiful ceremonies and rituals leading up to that are just more like conversation and kind of, expression of that final version of yourself right before you pass. So we're talking we're starting to get into the passing, but I really wanted to touch with you on, there are so many people that live in fear of death. And you can really see that when the conversation of death comes up. And there are some people that are like, oh yeah, and like really inherently comfortable. Maybe they're not, really get into it, but they're comfortable talking about it. And then there are people that you say, oh, well, what if you so-and-so dies? And then it was like, oh my gosh, like, don't even say that. Like, don't even say that word. It really upsets them. So it's important to have these conversations and not live in fear of death, because what you were creating with that, obviously it's an unavoidable, phase of life. It's the final phase, the only thing that is certain, right, in life is death. So how can we have these conversations with people? What do you suggest for, people to start to be a little bit more comfortable in a conversation about death?
So personally, I like to ask people to just start having conversations at all.
Right.
There is a level of, I don't know if propriety is the right word or not, but so people that I notice who will not even entertain the even thought of the end of their life, won't even talk about farting or birth or the fact that women bleed,
like anything messy, right?
So I think the reason why death phobia is so systemic in our culture, and it's not just our culture. There are other cultures as well that, speaking of death or speaking of even someone's name that is passed, it is not allowed. So it's not just our culture. There are other cultures as well. But specifically in the American culture, there's definitely this way about us that topics are not appropriate in public. There are certainly topics that people have privately in their own home.
Mm-hmm.
But how I like to invite people to even start exploring that is that there are actually games online, and they're card games. And these card games start by asking people, which I'll give you a list and you can put it on the bottom.
Down, like, okay, the card game app.
Okay, I'm not too sure if it's an app, but there's card games. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, and it's simple questions that, you can ask and just start having, intimately with the people that you would trust the most, to start having these conversations. If you're really brave, then there's something called death cafes, which I don't know if you've heard of death cafes or not.
No.
Okay, so death cafes were started in England, and it's basically become like this meet and greet that happens. It could be once a month, and people get together and they talk about death. how it has affected them, what they think about it. It's a formatted actual meeting that actually happens, and it's beautiful. And then, of course, there are, like I said, the card games that you can play. It's really just comes down to just being willing to have conversations at all.
Yeah.
That will eventually get you to be able to have the hard conversations that you need to have. Unfortunately, what I tend to find happening is that people don't have these conversations until they're forced to. And in which case, it's very traumatic for them, and it doesn't have to be, but there's other aspects of the fear, and it's not just that you're uncomfortable because your entire life you don't talk about that, and it's subliminal. It's not even like you don't talk about that. It's nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
So as a kid.
Yeah.
And no one talks about it. Like I said, I was lucky. I grew up in a family where that wasn't the norm in my family. One of my earliest memories, and I was really young, was when my great-grandmother's sister died. And I remember my father and mom tried to sneak me and my sister into the hospital. They caught us right as we were going into the room, and they didn't allow us kids to go in, but each parent took a turn and were able to go in. Very grateful to my parents for that. But when she died, and my great-grandmother was told that she was not going to be waked at home, I remember it being like such a deep emotional response for her that her sister was not going to be traditionally cared for by the family. When her husband passed away, he died at home, and he was waked at home and cared for by the family and brought to the cemetery. It was still very traditional in my family.
And that's still an option for people, which
it is.
Don't know. I think a lot of people think that it's illegal to do that.
Yes.
But it is still an option. And by inviting a death doula into your process, so your own process or your process with your loved one, you can make this shift into having these home experience.
Home funerals. Yes, and home vigils. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the other more important pieces to having a death doula, is that she can educate you and help you navigate and make choices. I used to say, I help people from diagnoses until internment, and obviously it's even before that, but specifically people start thinking about this only when they having a health crisis, and they're coming into that, and then they're forced to have those conversations. But I really encourage anyone 18 years and older to start this process now.
Yeah.
Like the minute you turn 18, to start having your legal paperwork filled out.
Yeah.
Period.
So let's talk about that paperwork. But just to kind of wrap that whole thing up, like, it's so important, right, that to understand that when you have that level of trauma after finding out that you're going to die, your decision-making process, your decision-making ability has changed, because you now have, for the most part, have these new emotions, and you're absorbing the emotions of the people around you. And so it's easier to make these decisions now with a clear head, with a healthy body, and be prepared, and then just revisit them when the time comes.
Yes. You revisit them as often as you can, every few, really. So I'll give you an example. There was one gentleman I had the pleasure of being with, who, when he first filled out his paperwork, He was physically fit. He hiked all the time. He went, ice
fishing?
mountain ice climbing.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just like that is like, yeah, that's his life, right? His whole life was that way. And I remember him, he said to me, when I met him, he was in a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
Was that when asked originally, he said, if there's a chance that I, wouldn't be able to walk, or I was going to be a paraplegic, please, no heroic measures. Please don't try to save me, right? And then he met this woman, and he had a child. And that completely changed his point of view on what he was willing to negotiate for the actual gifts of being alive, because it's not just that you can physically do something, or that one thing is going to be taken away from you, right? And that's the other thing that comes up for people with fears is they have this stance where if everything that I am is taken away, then what am I and where's my value?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you really need to do is there is a technique, and it's called value-based decision making, which is I highly recommend people look into, because it kind of helps people wrap their head around your value is not necessarily but you make other people's life easier, because some people are like, well, I don't want to be a burden, right? And if I'm, a paraplegic, or even, unable to walk or something, I'm now a burden, right? And that your value is somehow completely diminished, or that life is somehow diminished, because of these things that how we define ourselves change.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that happen as we age. We have
So it's important to revisit.
Hundreds.
It's important to revisit these this thought process often, because we're always changing, right? So
yes.
So to your point, the decisions that you maybe would have made last year may not even match up with the decisions that you'd be making now. You never know what's going to impact your life and what could impact that decision. So set your alarm clock for you're revisiting your death wishes.
Couple of years.
Seriously,
every couple
yeah.
of years. Yeah.
So let's just move on to this super interesting topic of the environmental impact of a what is now a pretty standard process of burying a body, of what to do with the body. When I first saw your interview talking about this, I was shocked about the statistics that you were saying, because we get all of this information about, no straws and no plastic bags and, reduce your carbon footprint, but nobody talks about the enormous impact of these burial processes. So let's talk about that a little bit. And then we'll move on to some of the options and the paperwork that goes along with what we were saying before.
Sure. Sure. Contemporary funeral practices is hands down my environmental flag that I like to wave around. People don't really realize the amount of wood, steel, concrete, the amount of bombing fluid is, I don't know, I think something like you can fill an entire Olympic swimming pool for every year's worth of embalming fluid that we use. And it was, you could make a walkway to the moon 28 times with the amount of concrete that we use in a year. A forest the size of New Jersey is the amount of wood. It can build 4.6 million single family homes with the amount of wood that we
bury a body.
Bury, stainless steel, bronze, like, I mean, it keeps going and going and going. And I think if people, there's this man, his name is Stephen Jenkinson, and he has changed my life with the way that he speaks. I don't believe everything that he says. I don't, I don't concur with everything that he says, but I love everything that he says. And one of the things he says is, this world would be better if everybody was a farmer. And I love that because I don't think people really realize that what you are is everything that ever was.
Could you explain?
The soil, the soil, you are the soil. Everything that ever was is in the soil. Everything that will ever be is in the soil. Every plant, every piece of fruit that you eat, every corn kernel, every, I don't know, whatever, spaghetti, spinach, it's like, that's what you are.
Yeah.
And we're keeping ourselves from that.
Yeah, and it's just this old ways. It's the same thing that we see in so many other behaviors, human behaviors, is that we're just stuck in these old ways and there's not enough momentum, there's not enough information being shared for people to start thinking differently and to start making a change. It's just like one of those, because death is like this forbidden topic, we just kind of like everything's, going by the wayside. But there are so many humans on the planet right now. We have to start thinking, conceptualizing a new way to do this, because there's no more space for us to bury all these bodies and stuff. So what are some options that we have? What are alternatives to the traditional casket and 6 feet under?
Okay. There are so many different options that are being formulated as we speak, but the one that I love the most is putting you back where you came from, and it's green burials. Green burials, and there are hybrids, because in all actuality, there are things that need to be taken into consideration. But as a general rule, everybody has the ability to be returned to the earth in like a shroud. And if you don't know what a shroud is, it is a piece of cloth large enough for you to be folded into and then lowered into the ground and allowed to decompose naturally. There are other ways, new scientific ways that people are trying to come up with, where you can be liquefied, where you could be frozen, hydrolysis, and then there's this mushroom suit. Which
I've seen the mushroom suit. That's for me.
I love it. It's a great idea. Yeah. Mycelium is, not only is it a hot topic, search it.
Yeah.
Like, truly start looking into it. I'm going
to include some links to that when we post this video for sure. So you have options, guys. We have options. We don't need to add to the problem for our children and our children's children. So let's be responsible and let's look into what those options are. Have conversations about them, whether we are playing a card game to bring it up or it's an easy conversation. Let's have them because obviously we don't know when our time is and when things are going to speed up. You know what I mean? Like, we've got climate change and everything else. So let's start making decisions. Tell us a little bit about the paperwork that needs to happen in order for like assigning our healthcare and some of the other documents that you had mentioned before.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you actually for bringing that up. It is extremely important that people realize that even if you have no health issues, it is really in your best interest, in your family's best interest, to have your legal paperwork, state-specific paperwork, for somebody to be able to make healthcare decisions in your stead if you become unable to speak for yourself. So in Massachusetts, which is where I am, Massachusetts has something called a healthcare proxy. It is a form that you would fill out, and you would name a person to be your medical representative in the event something were to happen. There's usually, like, if you want to get into it, there's like 2 alternates, and it needs to be notarized.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure that I'm sure every single state is different too. So we'll have to, you know, we all need to look into where we're currently living. And if we move, it's important to, in your moving process, to say, like, you know, see if things have changed so that you're covering that. So we'll post some information on how to find those documents. So that one is for your healthcare proxy if you become unable to make decisions for yourself. And then the other document is for once you are past, like, your living will, right? Everybody needs to have their what.
No, that's different. So I'm sorry. So to have somebody be able to take your body back to your home, right? It would be a designation of, the agent, designation of agent for disposition of the body. But the living will, which is just as important,
okay,
because in some states, the living will is the form that you fill out that lays out specifically what you would want and not want for medical interventions. A healthcare proxy form just designates the person responsible for following your wishes.
Okay.
The living will is what you write out that has specific medical interventions that the healthcare proxy would then follow.
Okay.
The advance directive is normally the combination of the 2 together.
Okay.
In Massachusetts, living wills are not actually legal documents. The healthcare proxy is only the legal document, which is why it's imperative that you have conversations.
I'd be like, oh yeah, I should really write my will one day, thinking that's the only death associated document that needs to be done and really isn't that important. But you know, to be responsible, you know, for our energy too, and the emotion that we leave behind, you know, we need to make sure that we're mindful of how that affects everybody, because they're all, you know, when you think about dealing with a loss, I know so many examples of friends and family that have just been torn apart and trying to figure out what to do, and with all these, you know, questions from the medical staff and from distributing assets and stuff like that, and it just becomes a nightmare and it rips families apart. So these are all super, super important topics of conversation to have, and steps for us to start taking now. And I will post all of the information that I can linked to this and all this great information that you've given us. When I talked to some of the people about my desire to find you, before we were connected, I was on a search for you because I wanted to have, you know, these conversations, and a lot of people, to my surprise, were really interested in pursuing this and possibly taking on the role of being a death doula. So if someone is interested in becoming a death doula, what avenues are available for them?
Oh, you know, thank goodness right now with technology, there are so many people popping up. I will send you some links. There are classes that you can take, and some of them are through, like, the University of Vermont has one. There are people who only do them in person. Like, one of the first teachers I had, Jerry Grace Lyons, from Sebastopol, California. She does her classes and they're in person. She's a beautiful, amazing woman. So there's Canadian teachers. There is another woman, actually 3 or 4 women got together and started what they called the International End-of-Life Doula Association.
Okay.
There are teachers that you can find that do hybrid, in person, and also online, just online. It depends on what's going to fit your needs. And
Right.
each teacher has a completely different focus. So you'll have some that will be more focused on the spiritual aspects. There'll be some who are like myself and some of the other teachers who add to it the medical side, where others won't add any medical, at all. So it depends on what it is that you're looking for. So I really suggest that if you do some research, really look into what their curriculum is, what they focus the most on, because everyone's going to come at this in a completely different way. If you want to know if you're just like, I don't know if this is, right for me, start by volunteering with Hospice. That is the perfect place to start. If you haven't already took care of somebody as they were dying within your own home or within your own community for friends, which is how I started, with friends and family, literally being with the entire process, you get a sense of how you'll be and what you want your focus to be. So like I said earlier, there's some end-of-life doulas who really just focus on, the ritual aspects of it and not necessarily the hands-on being with the person as they die. And it's completely different. And there's no one way. It's just what you can offer is what you can offer. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I will make sure to share all of the links too. It seems like there's just like any other type of education, right? You can go the formal way through classes and certifications, or you can take that apprenticeship opportunity and get that one-on-one. So it just depends on what kind of learner you are, what kind of doula you want to be. But it's, I think that this has been one of the best conversations I've ever had, in my life, because, I think it's going to be so helpful. I know it's helpful for me. It's going to be so helpful for anybody else that listens to this, for sure. And if you think about it, people that plan to have children, sometimes before they're even pregnant, they already have a birth doula in mind, and they don't even know if they're going to have a baby. So we all know we're going to die. We might as well find a doula, start the relationship. It seems like that is a healthy decision to make. All of these steps are, and I think can make life more fulfilling almost too by starting to accept this phase, right? And this new practical way. Yeah, it's all good. I know one of my favorite yoga gurus, Ram Dass, he says that death is like taking off a tight shoe. I love that. And I wanted to share that. And I want to ask one last question from you before we wrap up. And that is, what is the best advice that you either have ever been given or that you can give, or maybe it's one and the same?
Oh, well, the best advice I was ever given goes along with Ram Dass, which is, being present to what is, to being present to where you're at too, because that is going to give you an understanding of how you're going to react. Being honest in that way allows you to be able to disengage appropriately, with honor, right? Because you're honoring the other person if where you're really at is not conducive to being your best for them. I really love the whole aspect of see the other person just like that, as a person with their own set of unique inferences to what's going on. So you can look at a situation, you can come into a situation, but if you can drop into how you're feeling and then just ask that other person, how can I best love you right now? What is it that you need? That is the best way to truly be of service in any situation. Just, that's it. Just being aware and present.
Cool. I love that. Thank you so much. I am honored to have had some of your precious time. You are doing some amazing work. You are a beautiful speaker, and I'm excited to be connected with you and to have a relationship with you moving forward, because this has really touched me. So thank you so much. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Kathleen, I'm going to include her personal information so that you can reach out to her if you have any questions, or if you're looking to be connected maybe with a mentor, or just maybe starting your journey as being a death doula. So thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Kiki, and to all your peeps out in the internet.
Yeah, be well, everybody.
Thank you.